She's just a freak with a dog. The words came sharp, thrown across the cracked blacktop like stones. Kay heard them before she saw who said them, but she didn't need to look. It was always the same voice, sneering loud enough to gather a crowd, confident in its echo. The girl turned slightly, clutching the frayed strap of her worn backpack, but didn't stop walking. Beside her, the German shepherd slowed his pace, large paws pressing into the concrete in perfect rhythm with hers. The boy who spoke, Mason, was bigger than most of the other 8th graders, not just in size, but in presence. He moved like someone who thought he owned the ground he stood on, surrounded by 2 others who mimicked his every move like shadows, all laughter, shoulders, and arrogance. The moment Kay stepped off the bus that morning, they'd watched her. Quiet girl, military boots, black coat too heavy for the weather, and the dog. Most kids didn't bring animals to school, but Oak Ridge didn't have fences anymore, not since the storms. And Principal Heller, tired of lawsuits and begging parents, had agreed to let certain students bring service dogs if they had paperwork. Kay had paperwork, but nobody ever asked what for. The German shepherd's name was Rocco. He wasn't just big, he was unnervingly still. Sleek coat of dark bronze and black, a faint scar over one eye, and the sort of posture that made teachers nervous even when he did nothing. Some said he was a retired police dog, others whispered military, but all anyone really knew was that he never left Kay's side. He didn't bark, he didn't play, he just watched. That was enough to make him a target. The whole way after 3rd period was worse. Someone tripped her, she didn't see who, and her books scattered. Rocco was at her side in half a second, standing like a statue, ears high, head low. No growl, no warning, just presence. The hallway fell silent for a beat too long. Then Mason stepped forward and kicked one of her books across the floor. "You gonna let your little wolf clean that up too?" he smirked. "Bet he bites harder than you cry." Kay didn't answer. She just knelt down slowly, fingers trembling as she gathered her pages. Rocco never moved. Not until someone touched her shoulder, not in comfort, but with mock concern. "You okay, weirdo?" A girl with pink clips in her hair leaned in too close. "Or do you need a therapy cuddle from your mutt?" The air shifted. Rocco's head snapped toward her, just a flicker, eyes narrowing. The girl flinched back so hard she hit a locker. Mason laughed, but it sounded forced this time. Kay didn't say a word. She finished gathering her things and walked off, Rocco in silent formation beside her. At lunch, she sat in the corner of the yard beneath the shade of a burnt pine. Rocco lay against her knees like a wall, back straight, eyes fixed on the movement near the cafeteria entrance. He barely blinked. Most kids avoided her, but not today. Not when Mason and his boys still had something to prove. Their laughter was louder, closer. "You can't just bring a wolf to school and act like it makes you special," Mason said as he approached. "He doesn't even bark, he's probably broken." Rocco lifted his head. Kay didn't look up. She held a small sandwich in her palm, fingers resting gently on Rocco's fur as she fed him a piece without a word. "You think you're better than us," Mason snapped, suddenly stepping closer, hiding behind a leash. This time, Kay did look at him, but it wasn't defiance in her eyes. It was something older, worn, like she'd already lived through things Mason couldn't imagine. "My leash," she said softly, "kept him from killing someone once." The words hung like fog. Mason froze, something unreadable flickering across his face, but pride, and the crowd gathering behind him, pushed him forward. He took another step, a wrong one. Rocco stood. It was slow, deliberate, the way predators rise in silence. His body uncoiled, muscles tightening beneath the surface. He didn't growl, didn't flash teeth. He simply moved, and Mason took 2 instinctive steps back, hand half raised as if to shield himself. The other kids laughed nervously, unsure. Now if it was still a joke. Kye stood too. She didn't say anything more. Didn't need to. Principal Heller would later say he saw it from his office window. A girl and her dog, standing still under a pine tree while a group of students dispersed, like frightened birds. No one had been touched, no words had been shouted. But something changed that day. Not just in the school, in Kay and Rocco, because they'd spent 3 years running from the last place that had betrayed them. And for the first time, something inside them both had settled. Not peace, not yet, but a new understanding. Sometimes it takes the wrong kind of cruelty to awaken the right kind of fight. And Oak Ridge Middle School had just picked the wrong girl, with the wrong past, and the wrong German shepherd. But what no one saw coming, not Mason, not the teachers, not even Kay, was what Rocco had already sensed coming for days. Something far bigger than a schoolyard standoff, something darker, something from before, something that had followed them. Rocco began acting strange by the 3rd day, not aggressive, never that, but alert in a way that felt different. His patrols around the house became more frequent. He stood at the window past midnight, body tight, eyes locked on shadows in the trees. Kay started waking to the sound of his claws softly tapping the hardwood floors, pacing. He wouldn't sleep until she was curled up against the wall with him between her and the door. It wasn't the bullying anymore. That had stopped. Mostly, Mason and his followers had quieted, though not out of kindness. It was fear. And something else. Kay couldn't name something they didn't understand but knew not to provoke again. She didn't want to be feared, she just wanted to disappear. But the silence around her only grew thicker, heavier, and now even the air at home didn't feel right. They lived in an old, narrow house left to them by a woman Kay barely remembered, her grandmother or someone her mother refused to talk about. The house smelled like lavender and dust, with corners that never seemed to hold light. Her mother worked 2 jobs and barely spoke when she was home. She carried fatigue like armor, always one step from snapping or falling apart. Kay never blamed her. Grief had shaped both of them differently. But now Roko had started lingering outside the guest room on the 2nd floor, a room they never used. It was always locked, had been since they moved in. Her mother said it was full of junk from before and didn't like talking about it. But Roko sat in front of it each night, staring at the doorknob like he was listening to something behind it. He refused to go downstairs without first checking the hallway. Once Kay woke to find him standing on her chest, staring toward the stairs, rigid as if holding breath. Then came the scratching dot, soft at first, barely audible, then louder, rhythmic, something like nails on wood, slow and persistent. Kay thought it was raccoons in the attic. But Roko never barked. He never growled. He just stood guard at the bedroom door, body humming with tension. When she pressed her ear to the floorboards, she could hear it. The sound came from beneath them. The guest room, a space that didn't exist on the blueprint her mother kept tucked inside a drawer. On Saturday, Kay found the drawer unlocked, that had always been sealed, padlocked shut with a chain her mother never explained, but now it hung loose, as if something had pulled it free. Inside were letters, old, yellowed, folded in halves and quarters. Some were smeared with tears. Some had blood on the edges. All were addressed to a woman named Elva. The name struck something deep in Kay's bones. She didn't know why. Under the stack of letters was a collar, wide, thick, and made of military-grade leather. Not Roko's. This one was heavier, darker, too large even for a shepherd. Burned into the strap was a name, Ott. On the inside, in black ink that had nearly faded, was a warning. Only responds to Elva. Never without her. Never alone. Kay didn't understand, but when she lifted the collar from the drawer, Roko growled. For the first time in the 2 years she'd known him, his teeth showed. Not at her but at the collar. He backed away, pressing against the wall. Kay dropped it immediately, her heart hammering. That night, Roko refused to sleep in her room. He stood outside the guest room door until dawn, unmoving. The next day at school, the silence around her was tighter. Mason avoided eye contact. Even the teachers looked at her strangely. Something had shifted. She overheard whisper something about her address, about what used to be in that house, about a case from years ago. The words missing and unsolved floated near her locker like cold fog. What she didn't ask, she didn't want to know. But that night, when she went to feed Rosho, he was gone. Panic hit like a wave. She tore through the house, calling his name, barefoot, screaming. She checked every door, every lock, every window. He was nowhere. The front door was ajar. No paw prints outside. No broken fences. Just empty streetlights and the sound of wind. Her mother hadn't come home. Her phone went to voicemail. Kay sat on the stairs shaking. The collar lay on the hallway floor again. She hadn't touched it since the drawer. But now it was there, placed carefully in the center of the hall. The strap curled like a sleeping snake. She didn't cry. She sat for hours, knees tucked to her chest, listening for pause, for breathing, for anything. At 2:13 a.m. she heard it. A single bark, deep, guttural, and wrong. Not Roko. Lower, older. It came from the guest room. The door was open. Light flickered inside, but no bulbs were on. A cold draft crept down the hallway like fingers. Kay stood slowly, every instinct screaming at her not to move, but something stronger pulled her forward. She stepped inside. The room was empty, dust in the air like falling ash. In the corner, a small bed, perfectly made, beside a low table with faded photographs, one of a girl who looked almost like Kay, and beside her a massive German shepherd, its eyes too pale, its head tilted as if listening. Underneath the bed a low growl began, not warning. Recognition. Then came the footsteps on the stairs, not her mother's, not human. And Kay, heart caught between fear and memory, realized Roke hadn't run away. He had gone to get help, but not all help comes from the living. And some fights aren't just against bullies, they're against what's waiting to finish what it started years ago. The stairs creaked not from weight, but from age reacting to something unseen. Kay didn't move. The cold in the room didn't feel like weather. It felt like memory returning, raw and unfinished. Her feet ached from standing still too long, but every muscle inside her body locked in place. Something had stepped into the house, and it knew where to go. She crouched slowly, steadying herself against the rusted bedframe. The air was so still she could hear the distant ticking of the kitchen clock below. But underneath it, there was a sound she couldn't explain, like wind caught in a tunnel, breathing low and long through wood that wasn't meant to move. She turned her eyes toward the bed. The photograph was still there. A younger girl, and that shepherd larger than Roko with pale eyes like milk. The collar sat under the bed, but it wasn't dusty anymore. Someone had touched it recently, or something. Kye reached for it. Her fingers shook, but she couldn't stop. The moment her skin touched the leather, a sharp sting bloomed in her chest. Like a scream she hadn't heard, her ears rang, and somewhere, distantly, she thought she heard Roko barking, not outside, not upstairs. Below. She dropped to her knees and ran her hands across the floorboards. They were warped, uneven. Her pulse pounded in her throat as her fingers caught the edge of a groove barely visible in the low light. She pushed hard, and the wood shifted with a reluctant groan. Beneath it lay darkness, not just shadow, but space. Hollow. There was a crawl space. She knew instinctively this was where the sound had been coming from all along. The scratching, the breath, the thing Roko had been guarding against. She took a flashlight from the hallway drawer and lowered herself through the opening. The wood smelled like ash. The beam of light flickered before it steadied. Roko was down there. He lay still at first, eyes closed, body low to the dirt floor. When he saw her, he lifted his head. His coat was smeared with dust, but he wasn't. Heard his ears twitched once and he pushed himself upright. He didn't come to her. He looked past her, toward the far wall. Kay turned the flashlight slowly. The space stretched deeper than the house should allow. Farther than a foundation crawl space had any right to go. The floor was packed dirt, but old planks led in one direction, forming a kind of path too deliberate to be random. At the end of it stood something she couldn't name. Not quite a door, not quite a wall. A slab of iron, bolted into the earth, with scratches etched into its surface. Animal marks, claw marks, some shallow, some gouged inches deep. Kay's breath caught. The air here was colder, not in temperature, but in presence. The space remembered pain. Roko stepped ahead of her now, silent, determined. He stood in front of the slab and lowered his body into a guarded stance. That was when she saw it, the same collar, hanging from a hook above the iron slab. It hadn't been under the bed. She had held it upstairs, dropped it, and yet, here it was again, clean hung with purpose. There was movement behind the metal, a flicker of shape or thought. Something large stirred. It didn't growl. It spoke, not in language, in feeling, in pressure. Kay staggered back, grabbing Roko's fur to steady herself, her mind filled with images, not her own blood in snow, screaming, a broken leash, a woman's voice calling out a name, Otto. Then silence. Suddenly the slab began to shift, not by force, by release. The bolts trembled in their rusted sockets. Roko stood his ground. Kay wanted to run, to call someone, to scream, but she didn't move. Something in her needed to see what was inside. Something in her remembered then. The slab fell forward with a dull, bone-heavy thud, and the crawl space opened into a chamber carved into the earth. The first thing she saw was the girl from the photograph. Older now, but the same eyes, same posture, kneeling at the edge of the chamber. Her skin was pale, bluish, her breath shallow. Chains wrapped her wrist, binding her to a metal post. She looked up, but her eyes were wrong, blank, wide, pupils dilated. Elva, Kay whispered. The woman blinked, but it wasn't recognition, it was confusion. Then came the sound. From deeper in the chamber, a growl so deep it rattled dust from the beams. Kay turned the flashlight, and there, behind the woman, stood Otto, bigger than Roko, scarred, a beast, no longer shaped by human memory. His eyes shone pale white, as if no light could ever reach them again. His jaw trembled. And yet, when he saw Roko he paused. The two shepherds stared at one another. Then, Roko stepped forward and let out a short, broken bark. Otto twitched. His chains rattled. But he didn't lunge, he didn't snarl, he whimpered. Kay's breath caught. Something wasn't right. This wasn't an attack, this was grief. Roko approached him slowly. Otto shrank back, tail low, ears flat. He no longer looked like a monster. He looked like something that had been caged too long, and had forgotten what mercy smelled like. Then the woman spoke. Her voice was cracked, hollow. Help me. End this. He won't let me die. Kay froze. What is he? She whispered. The woman looked up at her, tears catching the dust on her cheeks. He's not the monster I was. I trained him to kill for me. Then I left him when he broke. He waited. All these years, still waiting, still loyal. Kay's knees gave out and she sank to the dirt. Roko sat beside her. Otto looked at them both and lay down at Elva's feet, not in fear and surrender. And Kay realized the midnights, the sounds, the fear, they were echoes of loyalty, not evil. But sometimes the most dangerous creatures aren't the ones behind chains. They're the ones left behind by someone they trusted. And now it was her turn to decide what to do with that truth. The quiet in the chamber felt older than the house above it. Kay could hear the thrum of her own heartbeat in her ears, echoing off stone and soil. Roko stood beside her, unmoving. Otto remained on the ground, massive head resting on his paws, chest rising with deep, exhausted breaths. There was no threat now, only weight. The kind that filled the room even after the fighting had stopped. Elva's hands trembled as she reached for the chain wrapped around her wrist. It wasn't locked, just knotted, old. She could have untied it any time, but she hadn't. She looked down at Otto with such broken affection that Kay had to look away. Not out of fear, but shame, some secondhand guilt she didn't understand. Yet Roko let out a soft huff beside her, eyes still locked on the older shepherd. Kay could feel the heat of him, alert but calm, not waiting to strike, waiting for her. Elva finally uncoiled the chain and let it drop to the dirt. The sound of it was final. She stood slowly, every joint stiff from years of crouching, of surviving. Her body moved like something that had been forgotten. She looked at Kay, then not with gratitude, but recognition. "You look like her," she said, voice brittle. "My sister," Kay blinked. "My mom." Elva nodded once. "Marin, she left this house and never came back. I thought she was dead." Her eyes softened. "She wanted out even then, away from what I was training Otto to become. She tried to stop it once, but Otto didn't understand. Stop, only protect, only attack. I made him." That way Kay's stomach twisted. Her mother had never mentioned a sister, never once. All she ever said was that the house came with too many ghosts. Otto stood now, slowly, one leg at a time. Despite the scars and years, he moved with quiet dignity. There was no menace in his posture, just obedience. He turned toward Elva, tail low, head lowered slightly in deference. Roko stepped forward, just once, closing the space between them. They stood nose to nose, past and present. Then Otto did something that pulled the breath from Kay's lungs. He licked Roko's snout. Once thought it wasn't dominance, it was apology. Roko sat down beside him. Elva's shoulders shook for a second. She looked like she might collapse, but she didn't. She just stared at the two dogs, one she had destroyed, and one she had no right to meet, and whispered, "He waited. After everything, he waited for me to come back." Kay didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The part of her that had once feared this place was gone now, replaced by something harder to hold, compassion. This hadn't been a haunted house, it had been a cage for all of them. Suddenly a loud bang echoed from upstairs. Kay jumped, heart hammering. Then came footsteps, heavy, unfamiliar. Her mother wasn't home. She hadn't returned. And that step, sharp, booted, forceful, wasn't made by someone curious. Roko and Otto were both on their feet now. Their ears pricked, their noses lifted. They moved as one, quietly but with intention. Not a sound came from them. Kay's skin prickled with a fear deeper than anything she'd felt below ground. Another bang, closer this time. Elva grabbed Kay's arm. Her grip was thin but strong. "You have to go." "No," Kay said, voice shaking. "Who's up there?" Elva didn't answer. She looked at the dogs. "He found us. It took him years, but he always said he would. He trained with me before Otto. He helped. Then he turned on us. Said we'd made something unholy." The realization hit Kay like ice. Someone, where else, had been part of this. Someone who knew what Otto had been. Someone who wanted to use that training again. The footsteps were at the top of the basement stairs now. Then came a voice, calm, coaxing, cold. "Elva, you still alive down there?" Kay stepped back, breath ragged. She didn't know the voice, but the tone it curled around her like smoke. "Dangerous," measured. Otto growled low. Roko answered with a deeper one. Elva turned to Kay. "There's another exit through the back crawl. Take it. The dogs will stay with me." "No," Kay whispered, clutching Roko's fur. "I'm not leaving you." Elva's expression softened with something like pride. "You are nothing like your mother. She ran your stay." The voice grew closer. A flashlight flickered through the stairwell. Otto let out one bark, loud, measured, the kind that carried meaning. "Go." Elva placed her hand over Kay's heart. "He came to reclaim what he thinks belongs to him. Otto isn't a weapon anymore, but that man doesn't want redemption. He wants control." Kay's legs moved before she made the choice. She turned, stumbling toward the back of the chamber where a narrow opening yawned beneath a stone slab. She looked once over her shoulder. Elva stood tall, a rusted pipe in one hand. Otto was beside her. Roko hesitated, torn, then turned to follow Kay. She pulled herself through the narrow crawl just as the footsteps reached the bottom. A single gunshot rang out. Kay's scream was silent, trapped in her throat, but no second shot came, only a sound. Sound not made by human lips, a roar, canine, deep, final, and then silence. Roko was behind her now, pushing her gently up through a vent that opened beneath the back garden hedge. They burst into the open air, cold, wet, filled with dew. Morning light was starting to break. Kay turned back to the house, her breath clouding in the air. She didn't know what she'd find inside, but something had ended, not with violence, with loyalty. With sacrifice. And somewhere beneath that old house, a broken dog had finally stopped waiting. But what scared Kay most was not what she'd left behind. It was what Roko was still looking toward, as if something had survived that moment. Something not done yet, and whatever it was, still remembered her scent. The house stood silent in the days that followed, its windows like eyes that had seen too much. The neighborhood barely noticed what had happened. Police came and went. Crime scene tape fluttered, then vanished. No official story ever made the news, just a vague mention of a trespasser, a scuffle, a fire contained before it spread. But none of that mattered to Kay because she had seen what no one else would believe. She had walked through shadows older than memory, met a woman chained not by force but by remorse, and watched two dogs, one broken, one whole, stand against a darkness only they understood. Her mother never returned to the house. When she finally called 3 days later, She told Kay to pack what she could. They'd be moving somewhere new. Somewhere with sunlight and clean floors and no locked doors. Kay didn't argue. She didn't even ask why. For once, the silence between them meant agreement. They both knew the house had taken too much from their family already, but Kay couldn't leave until she returned one last time. She and Rocco stood beneath the old pine in the back garden. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Her fingers clenched. Around the worn collar she had found in the crawlspace saltos, she had cleaned it, stitched the leather where it had frayed, but she couldn't bring herself to put it away. It wasn't just a reminder of what had happened, it was a piece of someone who had waited years, maybe decades, just to see kindness one more time. The entrance to the kraal had caved in after the fire. She couldn't reach the chamber anymore. Part of her was relieved. Another part burned with the need to know for sure, had Otto survived that final moment, had Elva, but deep inside, she knew the answer. Some stories end not with proof but with peace. That night, whatever had taken root beneath the house had been faced, not fought. Not everything needed a witness to be real. She buried the collar beneath the pine. Not out of grief but respect, she marked it with a small stone, smooth, flat, warm from her palm. Rocco lay beside the grave and rested his head on his paws. He didn't whine. He didn't move. But his eyes stayed on the earth long after she stood up, watching, guarding, as if something in him still stood beside Otto, shoulder to shoulder, in a memory too deep for words. Leaving the house was easier than she thought it would be. They moved to a smaller town where no one asked about the dog. Kay started at a new school, one without cold hallways or cracked lockers, and yet she didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Rocco spoke for her in the way he walked at her side, the way he watched the world with careful eyes. The kids gave her space. Some of them called her brave. Most called her strange, but none of them called her weak, not anymore. One afternoon, months later, Kay sat under a tree by the edge of a park. A boy came over and asked if he could pet Rocco. She almost said no, she always did, but something about the boy's hands reminded her of Mason's, not cruel, just unsure. She nodded. Rocco stayed still as the boy reached out, let him touch his head, even nuzzled his palm for a second. Is he trained? The boy asked. Kye looked at Rocco. He's something better than trained. The boy didn't understand, but he smiled and ran off. Kay stayed there, watching the sun dip lower behind the hills. And she thought of Otto, of the way he had lain at Elva's feet, of the way his eyes, clouded by time and pain, had cleared for just a second when Rocco barked. In that moment, he had remembered, not commands, not fights, but something more ancient, belonging. She realized then that loyalty was not the same as obedience. What Otto had waited for wasn't permission to act, but permission to rest. And in the end, it wasn't violence that freed him, it was recognition. Rocco had given him that. Not as a rival, but as kin. When she rose to leave the park, Rocco fell into step beside her like he always did. But now, there was something new in his gait. Not weariness, not tension. He walked lightly, watchful still, but no longer haunted, as if Otto's story had settled into him, not as a burden but as a guide. That night, as they lay in her small room with the window cracked and the wind whispering through the blinds, Kay reached for Rocco's neck and pulled him close. You saved me, she whispered, but you saved him too. Rocco didn't move, but his body pressed into hers with quiet understanding. And in that stillness, Kay finally let the tears come, not from fear, but from knowing she had witnessed something few people ever do. A dog who fought because he had to, a woman who stayed because she couldn't forgive herself, and a girl who walked into the dark not to destroy the past, but to understand it. In a world full of noise, sometimes the loudest acts are the silent ones. A dog waiting at a door, a girl refusing to run, and a bond that speaks only in glances, footsteps, and the kind of trust that can't be trained. Kay fell asleep with her hand curled in Rocco's fur, and somewhere, beyond dreams, beneath memory, two shepherds stood beneath a pine tree in silence, one watching, one remembering, both free at last. Some stories are not meant to be told in full. They are meant to be carried,